Good evening, everyone. We are now in Leviticus chapter 23. This is a rather long chapter, and we will break it down into two parts. In the first part, we will concentrate on the early spring feasts, and then we will follow this with the latter part of the year. So in chapter 23, it begins this way, and this will be and then. After chapter 22, Jehovah then spoke to Moses, and this is what he says. You should speak to the sons of Israel and say this to them. Now, oftentimes we may not be aware that God speaks and God expects Moses or whoever he speaks to convey directly what he says. It is not an option for Moses to paraphrase, I guess you can say that. It is virtually verbatim. It says this: the feast of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy, convocations, these are my feasts. Now, the earlier part of this chapter builds some of the fundamental meanings of words. So let's slowly take it. The first thing is the feast of the Lord. Now, these words, the feast of the Lord, actually literally means appointed days. There are specific words for feasts and festivals, but here this word does not really mean feast. It means appointed days. Appointed days where God designates uh, this one you shall call it as a holy convocation. These are my feasts, my appointed days. I guess when you talk about appointed days, you can alternatively call these appointments. In our modern term, when you fix a date, a time, and a place to meet, we call it an appointment. And in the ancient days, God calls them appointed dates or moed. That's the Hebrew word, moed. Now, why are these moed important? Is because when we go back to Genesis chapter 1, and when we come to the fourth day, when God appointed the sun, moon, and stars for specific roles and functions that they are to play, they are to describe to the Israelites how to call a day and a year, but more importantly, appointed days. Genesis chapter 1 actually reads appointed days. I think it would we would be surprised to find out this is in Genesis chapter 1 verse 14. God made the sun, moon, and stars with specific roles, and one of those roles is so that the Israelites know when an appointed day is. So on day 4, God uh, God made, I would say made would be assigned roles for the sun, moon, and stars. And they are all very important to tell time. The constellations will tell the month of the year. The moon will tell the beginning of the month to the middle of the month to the end of the month. The sun will give us the day and night. And so when you have the stars in their constellations move across the skies, over a period of time, you find that they will come back to that same position after 1 year. And so the Israelites are given the natural elements of the sun, moon, and stars, the heavenly bodies, to help them tell time. Tell time for what? In Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, it is time for these appointed days of Jehovah. Why are they important? Because if you recall, I've constantly said God's land, God's rules. And when they get into the land, God is now making appointments with the Israelites. Not feasts, but appointments. They are not just there to celebrate, but they are there to remember God and meet God according to God's terms, God's land, God's rules, God's days, or God's appointed days. So we just dropped the word feast for now. The second point that I want to make is that you shall proclaim. Now, this word proclaim is you shall call. You will call them holy convocations. Holy means special. It's not sinless, please. The Hebrew word for this particular word, Kodesh in this case, means special, unique, different. It is a different kind of day. You call them special convocations. Now, this word convocations, mikra, also requires us to understand that mikra, right here, which we translate as convocations, is related to the word proclaim. It is about the calling out to assemble. This is important because they only assemble on very specific dates and time. And this is the beginning of the list of dates and time that they are to come together. So this is called a holy convocation, a holy time that they need to come together. That's our first background word that we must be familiar. And so now we will talk about the second important background word, which is in verse 3. Verse 3 is fairly simple. We've seen them before. It says, 6 days work shall be done. Now, the way to understand this work is your regular occupation, your occupational work can be done. But on the seventh day is a Shabbat. So we say on the seventh day, it is called a Shabbat of Shabbaton. Now, Shabbat of Shabbaton, and this is actually how the word goes. So it's Shabbat, Shabbaton, Shabbaton. So Shabbat, Shabbaton. This is a very particular word. It means it is a Sabbath. It means it is uh, a week, right? For 6 days, you shall work your occupational work. But on the seventh day, it is a Shabbat, Shabbaton, a Sabbath of holy rest. Or you can say that this is a day of well, we call it a complete rest. So this set of words, Shabbat, Shabbaton, literally means absolute rest. And here we find the second definition. It is a holy convocation. What does that mean? It is, well, I guess you can call it uh, a Mikra Kodesh. Where do we see this before? A holy convocation, a holy convocation. Exactly there. It is the same word. And here lies the second definition. A holy convocation literally means it is a day of complete rest. When you call them out, you don't do your regular work. And so it says, you shall do no work on it. And by work, it is the same as the occupational work. Now, I'm spending time here so that we will first understand all the words used so that we're not confused. So, you shall do no work, no occupational work on it. It is the Sabbath of Jehovah in your dwellings. It is the Shabbat for, I think this would be a better way. It is a Shabbat for the Lord, not of the Lord. The Shabbat for the Lord. Meaning, when you take a rest, then you are taking it because God says so. And that is what it means by this word for. Our introduction here in these two verses is to lay the groundwork for the rest of the chapter so that we have a better understanding of why it is given and why it is repeated here. It was first mentioned in the book of Exodus, but here in the Levitical laws, it is now more clearly expounded. These are not mere feasts, they are appointed days. That's the first call. First point you have to remember, and you're going to call it a special or holy convocation. It is a special calling out for the entire Israel to assemble. These are appointments that God is making with the nation of Israel. Not right now, but when you get into the land. The second part would be the Sabbath. Where did we see these kinds of definitions? That would be very much in the book of Genesis. So if you go back to the book of Genesis, you find that the 6 days they do work and the 7th day you rest really comes from Genesis 2:2 and 2:3. Now, what does that mean to us now? It means that by this time, they would know what is Genesis. We have come across the book of Exodus in chapter 20, the giving of the 10 commandments or the 10 words or 10 statements publicly to all the Israelites to hear that 6 days God made the heavens and the earth and all that is in them. And he rested on the 7th day. Exodus chapter 16 talks about that. The giving of the manna that they are to pick up once every day to finish it. But on the 6th day, they are to collect twice the amount so that on the 7th day, they do no work. And hereby lies the idea of occupational work. If these are things you do on a daily basis, then on the 7th day, you don't do. Picking up manna or planting or picking food or collecting food, That's an occupation in the Hebrew sense. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. Now we know that kind of a phrase. And so occupational work would be regular things that occupies the time every day. And then God says on the seventh day, it is an absolute rest that you don't do what you regularly do. And so you just cease work because it is the Shabbat, the rest for Jehovah in everywhere you live. And that also seems to suggest that even if you're not in Jerusalem or in the promised land, you also observe this. And so this is actually told to the children of Israel. The non Jews or the non Israelites, they are not told these laws. Obviously, we have never seen God insisting the Sabbath for the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Edomites, the Moabites, or the Ammonites, and all the other people of the nation, except for the children of Israel. Why? Because it sets them apart. When they do this, everyone else will be shocked and surprised. Why is this such a strange practice in the land of Israel? And so the Shabbat or the Sabbath is uniquely Israel so that the nations around Israel can actually see, not just hear, but see what they do, that their honor of God of not doing work on the seventh day is by instruction of God. It is not a natural thing, actually. So people can work until they drop. But to the Israelites, they are only to work 6 days. And they stop work for the seventh day. And it makes them holy. It makes them unique. And so verses 1 to 3 is to lay the foundation that the seventh day is a Shabbat, Shabbaton, that it is an absolute rest, and it is also called a holy convocation. This holy convocation is a rest day. That means this: when we read from verse 4 onwards, you must bear in mind that whenever you read Shabbat, Shabbaton like this, it is with reference to the Sabbath, that you do not do work on this particular holy convocation, because the rest is commanded by God. It is not a natural rest day because there is no natural rest day in a regular week. Second thing is to pay attention that this is appointments. We don't want to miss our appointments in our daily lives. Much more that these Israelites will not want to miss an appointment with their God. And so these so-called feasts are really appointed days, appointments, days where God will want to meet his people. Now, I can't underscore the importance of this. And I mentioned all these concerning the sun, moon, and stars. Why? Because God is not giving the Israelites any reason to miss his appointments. God gave them the natural clock in the sky so that they can be guided and then congregate at the specific times to meet God on in God's land according to God's rules. And so with these as our underlying background, let's begin to take a look at some of the spring festivals. Verse 4 says, these are the feasts of the Lord. Now, I think we need to be very clear. While we do call them feasts, they are really appointed days. So they are called appointments or appointed time. It is constantly repeated They are the appointed times of Jehovah. They are also holy convocations. Holy convocations means special times to call out the Israelites, and for them to proclaim at their appointed times, to recite or to call out. So this word proclaim literally means recite or to read aloud at their appointed time. So these words are repeated twice. Feasts and appointed times are really the same word. And so these are the appointed times, meaning you can see when God keeps repeating something, it means that it's an emphasis and it is really important for them to know. And it is for them to stop doing work in a call out day, which is holy, special, and they will recite things or read aloud things at these days. The first of them would be on the 14th day of the first month. Remember, at this time, there are no names given to the months of the year. And so the ancient, in the time of the writing of the Torah, they are only known by numbers. On the 14th of the first month, so on the 14th of the uh, head of the month, right? That would be a good way on the in the head month. And that would be the first month now. When do we see this? This would be in Exodus chapter 12. God changed the calendar that at this point in time, they need to always come back to the first month of the year to remember what God did for them in Egypt, to lead them out of Egypt. And it starts on the 14th day. By the way, today is the 14th day of the first month. It so happened. And so this would be the day called the Lord's Passover. So it is at twilight in the afternoon. It is the Lord's Passover. Now, what does that mean? So, first things first, twilight is in the afternoon. It is the Pesach. It is the Pesach to God or the Pesach for God, for Jehovah. It is done for Jehovah so that it is a commemoration of what he would do in Egypt to Pasach over the households where there is blood on the two side posts and the lintel. And so this is the idea of Exodus chapter 12. So Pesach is the noun, and it's usually called Passover, right? This is the noun. Pasach, on the other hand, is the verb, and it is to skip over. And so this is the skipping over remembrance of what God did in Egypt. Now it goes on to describe, and on the 15th day of the same month, so in the first month, on the 15th day, it says here, it is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. Now, I need to clarify something. This word is not moed. This word is chag. Chag. Chag literally means to gather together for a festivity, and usually you would eat and dance and go around in a circle. So that's what Chag is. So Chag is a celebration. It is to eat and dance, to celebrate in a circle. And so this word feast is not moed. This word feast is not this appointed time. This is literally called the feast of unleavened bread, or you call it the feast of matzah. Matzah. Matzah is unleavened bread. Unleavened bread means the dough does not have leaven or yeast. It doesn't rise. It is usually uh, baked over fire on not a pan, but on a grill. And that's why it comes across as with all the lines. And it is cooked that way. It is unleavened and it is to the Lord or for Jehovah. And so the rules are now coming out. Now remember, all of what we are reading are the high levels. The details of the what they do on a daily basis is not written in chapter 23 of Leviticus. So they would refer to the oral traditions to find out a whole lot more of the details of what they need to do. But we know on a high level, the chak or the chak hamatzah or the chak of matzah or the unleavened bread is for 7 days. You must eat unleavened bread. When you say that, it means that there is no option for leavened bread. That is basically what it means. Now, verse 7 says this: on the first day, you shall have a holy convocation. And this is what I want to point out again. The holy convocation is a rest, it is a Shabbat, it is a rest. And so for 7 days, you do that. On the first of the 7 days, so you find that on the 14th, you slaughter. On the 15th, till the 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then on the 21st is the 7 days. It begins on the 14th because the 14th is when you kill the Passover animal, whether it is a ram or whether it is a goat of 1 year. On the 15th of the month, then it is the feast of unleavened bread, Chag Matzah, for 7 days. And you must eat unleavened bread, so you get the general idea. But on the first day, right here, you are supposed to have a holy convocation. What is a holy convocation? A Sabbath. It is important for us to understand this, because if you don't, then you would always think Sabbath must be the seventh day. It's not. A holy convocation is treated like a Sabbath, but it is not on the seventh day. It is on whatever day God so decides. And so on this first day of the 7 days, it is a rest day. Now, it goes on to tell us, you shall do no customary work on it. Now, what is customary work? This is the same idea, occupational work. Occupational work means if you are a shepherd, you don't tend your flock on this day. Then it goes on to tell us, but you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord for 7 days. Now, this one we have seen in the early parts of Leviticus. This is Ishe. So, An offering made by fire, is called Ishe. This we have seen in Leviticus 1 to 7 that the offering, it may not be specifically described here, but it has to be burnt up, right? It has to be burnt up. Then we are also told the seventh day shall also be a holy convocation, and you shall do no customary work on it. So understand this. We have the first day, we have the seventh day, and in both cases, they are a holy convocation. It is a rest, and you don't do your occupational work on it. So now we can circle the 15th and the 21st day. It is also a holy convocation. So I hope that we understand that this is the general gist of the Pesach and the Hag HaMatzah, which means that we have a definition of the Lord's Passover. It is on the 14th day. On the 15th day, which is the next day, that would be a Sabbath, a rest. On the 21st day, it is also a Sabbath. For all 7 days, you eat matzah. For all 7 days, you make a fire offering. So basically, you find that the 14th day is only in the afternoon. Now, why is this unique? Because by the time you slaughter the animal, you will be entering into the next day. That's how we would read this, right? So the next day would be the 15th. And once you enter into the next day, it is now a holy day. It is also called a Shabbat because it is a rest, that none of the occupation is done. And so they will prepare whatever they need to do to eat the meal, or what we call the Pesach meal. Today they are called the Pesach Seder. So I just introduced to you a word. It's called the Pesach Seder. This Seder means an order of things that you do on this day at the meal. And it is largely put together when they were in exile in Babylon, and it got carried back into today's customs and festivities. But at the time of Moses, right here, there is no Pesach Seder. What exactly happened? We are quite sure that the modern Pesach Seder is probably not there, but they will eat their meal and they would offer fire offerings. They will eat the matzah for 7 days, and they will basically remember what happened when they left Egypt. So, and God says, I want this to be an appointed time. Now, without saying much in this chapter, the appointed time here would be to come together in a place where God appoints them. And that is when they will eventually have to do when they enter into the promised land. Now we come to the next feast. In the next feast, it will be the Feast of First Fruits. We will go through this, and we hope that we'll be able to understand and analyze this in a little bit more detail so that we have a much better understanding of what exactly is happening. Verse 9 says this, and then Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, remember, all of this is to the sons of Israel. It says, when you come into the land, meaning not now, they are in the wilderness, but when you come into the land, what land? The promised land, which I give to you, and you reap its harvest, meaning you have a time when you can actually harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf. Now, this word sheaf, by the way, is Omer, and we will be reusing this word more often. And Omer is a tenth of an ephah, but in this case, it is a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Kohen. Now, what does this mean? A sheaf would be a bundle. And in that bundle, they are already harvested and they are all grains. And they are tied together in a bundle. And this is called an Omer. Because it's already tied in a bundle, you can actually see that it could be used for waving. And so we'll talk about that right now. He says, the priest, notice, he would be the priest, shall wave the Omer. Shall wave the Omer. Now, this word here says here, before the Lord. It actually means to the face. To the faces of Jehovah. To be accepted on your behalf, which means that all these things as done in the tabernacle and eventually in the temple, it is brought by the sons of Israel, but they will actually pass it to the priest. Right? This is important. He will do what is needed in a wave offering to God, and he's waved back and forth, left to right, to be accepted, to gain the pleasure. I think to be accepted would be to gain the pleasure of God. To gain the pleasure of God on your behalf. Now, notice the day. On the day after the Shabbat, the priest shall wave it. Now, this is something that many people tend to argue. So, after the Shabbat of what? So, the Orthodox Jews will consider this after the Shabbat of the 15th of the month. Because after the 15th is a Shabbat rest. 14th is when you have the Pesach slaughter. 15th is the first day of the Hag, the Chag, Matzah, the unleavened bread. And the Sabbath or the rest, I think this is important, the rest itself, the Shabbat, is on the first day and the seventh day. So the day after the Shabbat would be the 16th. Now, the confusion here would be that some people would think that, oh, that would be the Sabbath of the Pesach. But it doesn't say that, right? It doesn't. It just say the Sabbath. And by the way, this is in a small letter, Shabbat. It is the rest. And on that day, the priest will wave it. And so this is the continuation to describe and is attached to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And you shall offer on that day, when you wave the sheaf, right here on the 16th, a male lamb of the first year. Notice on the 14th, you already slaughtered the Pesach. This is not the Pesach. This is addition to the Pesach, without blemish, as an olah to the Lord. Right? And so that day is the same 16th day. It's grain offering, the mincha. Which is when you offer to God, shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Now, an offering made by fire is an ishe. Remember, 7 days they are to make an ishe. So on this 16th day, the ishe is a mincha and an olah. Right here. 2 offerings. So we only know of these offerings when we actually started in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7. And then we have the familiar words for a sweet aroma. Now, this sweet aroma was first noticed in Genesis chapter 8. The sweet aroma, literally, it is called the reach nihoak. This is really the scent and the aroma that rises up, and it makes God happy. When it makes God happy, it links to this pleasure, right? These two are interconnected. Then we have a libation. The libation is a drink offering of wine, 1/4 of a hin. And you shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God, and it shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Now, one of the things that you find is that the text doesn't say a lot. It just gives you the general idea. If you were to practice this, then you will have a lot of questions. How, when, and in what way, at what time, who to do this, how big, how old, what color. Now, all of these will be very practical questions. And those questions are found in the oral traditions. Remember, when we were talking about oral traditions, we say that Moses had been told to write this down as part of the Torah, and the rest that was told to the people to pass down generation to generation is so that they are able to practice. And those of us who actually read this general idea will be able to appreciate and understand what is happening, but not sufficient for us to mimic or do what they do. And so a lot of things that they do comes from oral tradition, very similar to our Eastern Oriental practice, whichever nation you may come from. For example, if you come from the Chinese culture, there's a lot of unique things that is handed down generation to generation, and that's what we call oral traditions. What is written down in the history books is what we are reading now in Leviticus chapter 23. They are written down as part of history that we can know, But in order to practice our ancient cultures, we need to know what our forefathers have passed down, and that would be the oral traditions. Now, with this, we've come to the end of our session today, and we will continue tomorrow.